Hi, I'm Sarah. Today, I'm going to read you the story of Brittany, which is titled like this: My sister tripled my rent to $6,000 after I was fired. Our parents sided with her. She doesn't have to feed the parasite. So I moved out without saying, and a year later, the calls started when they found out I had opened my own business. Well, let's go. I'm Brittany, and I'm 35 years old. People always ask me how I ended up in the restaurant business, like it's some kind of accident. Truth is, I've been dreaming about running restaurants since I was a kid. While other girls played house, I was setting up pretend restaurants in my bedroom, complete with menus I'd written in crayon. After college, where I studied to become a restaurateur, I jumped straight into the industry. That was 13 years ago, and I haven't looked back since. Well, not until recently anyway. 10 years ago, my parents came to me with what they called a family situation. My older sister Rachel was having money problems. She owned this decent apartment, but couldn't afford to keep it without rental income. The thing is, she didn't want to sell it either, because she knew it would be worth more later. "Brittany, honey, we need you to help Rachel out," my mom said during one of our Sunday dinners. "She's really struggling right now." My dad nodded along. "The rent in that area is about $1,200, but if you could pay $1,500, it would really help her get back on her feet." I remember thinking it was a lot of extra money, but Rachel was family. She'd always been the golden child, the one who had the perfect life planned out. If she was struggling, it must have been serious. "Sure," I said, "I can do that." So I moved into Rachel's apartment and started paying $1,500 every month. The place was decent, but needed work. Over the years, I slowly transformed it into something beautiful. I renovated the whole space, went for a clean Scandinavian style that I'd always loved. New furniture, modern appliances, everything carefully chosen and paid for with my own money. My parents and Rachel would visit sometimes, and they always complimented my taste. "Brittany, you have such an eye for design," my mom would say, running her hand along the kitchen countertop I'd installed. Rachel would nod and smile, agreeing that the place looked amazing. But that's where the compliments ended. Nobody ever asked about my work, about how I was climbing the ladder in the restaurant industry. 5 years after I moved in, I'd worked my way up to deputy director of a pretty successful restaurant chain. It was a big deal for me, but when I tried to share the news, the conversation always shifted. "That's nice, dear," my mom would say, then immediately follow up with, "By the way, your father needs help with the car payment this month." I always said yes. I knew I'd never see that money again, but I told myself it was just my way of helping family. They needed support, and I was in a position to give it. Around the 5-year mark, Rachel's situation changed. She got married to this guy Tom, and they had a baby together. I was happy for her, really. But then she asked me to come over for a family meeting. "Brittany, now that we have the baby, our expenses have gone way up," she explained, bouncing little Emma on her knee. "We're going to need you to pay $2,000 instead of $1,500. I felt my stomach drop. $500 more dollars every month was no joke, even with my promotion. But looking at Rachel holding her baby and Tom sitting there with this expectant look on his face, I couldn't bring myself to say no. "Okay," I said, "I can make that work." What they didn't know was that I'd been saving money for almost 10 years. Not just small amounts either. I had a real plan. Every month, after paying my inflated rent and helping out with their various emergencies, I put away whatever I could toward my dream of opening my own restaurant. I'd learned so much working in the chain. I could see all the mistakes they were making, all the ways they were leaving money on the table. I had a complete business plan worked out, down to the menu design and staffing structure. I was sitting on almost $180,000, just waiting for the right moment to make my move. Everything changed when our old director, Mr. Peterson, decided to retire. He'd been running the restaurant chain for 23 years, and honestly, he was like a mentor to me. When I first started as a server, he saw something in me and pushed me to grow. He's the one who encouraged me to take management courses and eventually promoted me to deputy director. "Brittany, you've got the instincts for this business," he used to say. "Keep your eyes open and learn everything you can." So when he announced his retirement, I figured I had a decent shot at taking over. I mean, I'd been his right hand for years, knew every aspect of the operation, and had been basically running the day-to-day stuff while he focused on the bigger picture. But then, he dropped the bomb. His daughter Madison was coming in to take over. Fresh out of college, 22 years old, with zero real-world experience in restaurant management. She went to Culinary Institute of America, he explained to the staff during the announcement meeting. Top of her class, brilliant mind for the business. I'm confident she'll take us to the next level. I tried to keep an open mind. Maybe she really was that good. Maybe her education would bring fresh ideas that could complement my experience. I was willing to work with her, show her the ropes, help her succeed. That optimism lasted exactly 3 days. Madison called me into her office on her first Monday. She'd already redecorated the place, gotten rid of her father's old wooden desk, and replaced it with this glass thing that looked like it belonged in a tech startup, not a restaurant chain headquarters. "Brittany, right?" she said, not looking up from her laptop, like she hadn't met me a dozen times over the years at company parties and family events. "Yes, that's right. I wanted to welcome you officially and see how I can help you settle in." She finally looked at me, and I didn't like what I saw in her eyes. It was like she was sizing me up, but not in a good way. "Here's the thing," she said, leaning back in her chair. "I've been reviewing the staff structure, and I think we need some changes. Fresh blood, you know? This industry moves fast, and we need people who can keep up." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What kind of changes are you thinking about?" "Well, let's be honest. You're what? 35? That's getting up there for this business. This is the time of the young, the innovative. I'm planning to bring in some of my classmates, people who really understand where the industry is heading." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Madison, I've been with this company for 13 years. I know every supplier, every system, every challenge we face. I've helped build what this place is today." She waved her hand dismissively. "That's exactly the problem. You're stuck in old ways of thinking. We need to disrupt, to innovate. I've already reached out to my friend Jessica from school. She's perfect for your position." The conversation went downhill from there. I tried to explain all the projects I was working on, the vendor relationships I'd built, the staff training programs I'd developed. She wasn't interested in any of it. "Look, I'm not trying to be mean here," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise, "but you need to accept that times have changed. This isn't personal, it's just business." I left that meeting feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. 13 years of my life, and she was ready to throw it all away for some college friend who'd never worked a real shift in a restaurant. That evening, I called Mr. Peterson. I figured if anyone could talk sense into her, it would be her own father. "Jim, we need to talk about Madison," I said as soon as he picked up. "She wants to fire me and replace me with one of her college friends, someone with no experience in our specific operations." There was a long pause. "Are you sure about that?" Madison told me she was excited to work with the existing team. "I'm telling you what she told me directly. She said I'm too old, that this is the time for young people, and that she's already contacted her replacement for me." Another pause. "Well, you have to understand, Brittany. Madison graduated from the most prestigious culinary program in the country. She's presented me with this incredible development program for our chain. Her professors say she's one of the most promising students they've ever had." I could hear the pride in his voice, and I realized this conversation wasn't going to go the way I'd hoped. "Jim, education is great, but she has no practical experience running operations like ours. She doesn't understand our customer base, our supply chains, our staff dynamics. I'm sure she'll learn quickly, and maybe some fresh perspectives are exactly what we need." "So, you're okay with her firing me?" "Now hold on, I didn't say that. Let me talk to her. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. She probably just wants to restructure things, not necessarily get rid of experienced people like you." I hung up feeling slightly better, but that feeling didn't last long. 2 days later, Madison called me back into her office. "I talked to my dad about our conversation," she said, not even pretending to be friendly this time. "He thinks maybe I was a bit hasty in my assessment." "Oh, good. I'm glad we can work this out. Don't get too excited. I'm giving you 2 weeks to wrap up your current projects and transition your responsibilities. After that, you can start looking for a new job." 2 weeks? Madison, that's not nearly enough time to properly transition 13 years of relationships and knowledge. "It'll have to be. Jessica starts in 3 weeks, and I want a clean slate for her." I stared at her for a moment, Realizing there was absolutely no point in arguing, she'd already made up her mind, probably before she ever walked into this building. "Fine," I said. "I'll do my best to document everything in 2 weeks." As I walked out of her office, I felt this weird mix of emotions. Part of me was devastated. This job had been my life for 13 years. I poured everything into it, learned everything I could, built relationships with people throughout the industry. But another part of me felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For the first time in years, I was going to be free to pursue my own dreams instead of building someone else's empire. Maybe this was exactly the push I needed. 2 weeks later, I walked out of that office building for the last time as an employee. Madison had made the transition as difficult as possible, questioning every procedure I tried to document and dismissing most of my recommendations. I'd watched her friend Jessica waltz in like she owned the place, nodding along to Madison's grand plans while clearly having no clue what any of it actually meant in practice. For 3 days after that, I just stayed home. I ordered takeout, binge-watched Netflix, and let myself process what had happened. 13 years of my career, gone because some spoiled kid wanted to play restaurant mogul with her college buddies. But you know what? Those 3 days of doing absolutely nothing felt amazing. I couldn't remember the last time I just relaxed without worrying about inventory reports or staff schedules. On the 4th day, I decided it was time to tell my family. Saturday dinner at my parents' house was a tradition. Rachel always came with Tom and their 4-year-old daughter Emma. I waited until we were all seated before I brought it up. "So, I have some news. I got fired from my job." The reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of concern or sympathy, everyone just stopped eating and stared at me. The silence stretched on until it became uncomfortable. "What do you mean, fired?" my dad finally asked, his voice sharp. "The new director decided she wanted to bring in her own people. Apparently, I'm too old and set in my ways." "So, you're unemployed?" my mom said, like she was confirming something terrible. "Does this mean you can't help us anymore?" my dad interrupted. "I mean with the financial support?" I felt like I'd been slapped. Here I was, dealing with the biggest career setback of my life, and their first concern was whether their money train had dried up. "What about the rent?" Rachel jumped in. "Are you saying you can't pay rent anymore?" "Rachel, I just lost my job. I need some time too." "Oh, hell no," she said, her voice getting louder. "I'm not running a charity here. If you can't pay rent, you need to move out. I've been paying you $2,000 a month for an apartment that should rent for $1,200. She rolled her eyes. "Fine. $6,000 a month. Take it or leave it." I stared at her. $6,000? "Rachel, you're trying to force me out." "Maybe," she said with a shrug. "We can't afford to support unemployed people." I turned to my parents, waiting for them to say something. My mom was the first to speak. "I'm sorry, Brittany, but Rachel's right. She's not obligated to support a parasite." "A parasite? My own mother called me a parasite." "I understand," I said quietly. "I'll be out in a week." 3 days, Rachel snapped. "I want you out in 3 days." I looked around the table one more time. After all the money I'd given them over the years, all the extra rent I'd paid without complaint, I was a parasite. 3 days it is, I said, standing up. "Thanks for dinner." I spent the next 2 days packing everything I'd bought over the years. Every piece of furniture, every appliance, every decoration that had turned that place into a beautiful home, all of it went into a storage unit I rented across town. Rachel called me repeatedly while I was moving out, screaming about how I was stealing her furniture. Each time, I calmly explained that everything I was taking had been purchased with my own money. When I was done, the apartment looked exactly like it had when I'd moved in 10 years earlier. Bare walls, cheap fixtures, basic builder-grade everything. That night, I checked into a hotel downtown. The next morning, I started apartment hunting. I found a nice one-bedroom place in a good neighborhood for $1,400 a month, $600 less than I'd been paying Rachel. I blocked their phone numbers, all of them. Rachel, Tom, my parents, gone. As I signed the lease, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in 10 years, I was paying fair market rent. For the first time in 13 years, I didn't have a boss, and for the first time in my adult life, I was about to chase my own dreams. The day after I moved into my new apartment, I started implementing my business project. I'd been planning this for almost 10 years, and now I finally had the freedom to make it happen. I spent weeks driving around the city looking for the perfect location. Finally, I found it, an abandoned space in a neighborhood that was just starting to turn trendy. The rent was cheap because the place was a mess, with water damage and outdated electrical, but I could see the potential. The foot traffic was good, there was parking nearby, and it was close to both offices and residential areas. I bought the lease for next to nothing and immediately started renovations. I did a lot of the work myself to save money, but hired professionals for the electrical and plumbing. While the construction was happening, I was busy with all the other aspects of starting a business. Getting the permits and licenses was a nightmare of paperwork and inspections, but I knew the system from my years in the industry. I hired a small staff, a cook, 2 servers, and a delivery driver, people I'd worked with before who I knew I could trust. I also took out a business loan from the bank. With my savings and industry experience, I qualified for decent terms. It wasn't a huge amount, but combined with my own money, it was enough to get everything set up properly. When I designed the menu, I kept it simple but high quality. Burgers, sandwiches, salads, a few pasta dishes, comfort food done right. And I made sure to set up delivery from day one. I remembered the pandemic from 3 years ago and how important delivery had become during the lockdowns. That experience taught the whole industry that delivery wasn't just a nice option anymore, it was essential. Opening day was terrifying and exciting at the same time. I'd put everything I had into this place, my money, my time, my dreams. If it failed, I'd be starting over from scratch at 35. But it didn't fail. In fact, business was better than I dared to hope. The delivery system I'd set up worked perfectly, and people in the neighborhood quickly discovered we offered quality food with reliable service. Orders started pouring in. People were stuck at home, tired of cooking, and looking for good food that wasn't fast food garbage. My simple menu and reliable delivery hit exactly what people wanted. Within 6 months, I was making a small profit. Not huge, but enough to start paying down my business loan ahead of schedule. By month 9, my profits had doubled. I was being incredibly careful with the money, putting almost everything back into the business, better equipment, marketing, building up a cash reserve. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. This wasn't just surviving, this was thriving, and I was doing it entirely on my own terms, without anyone else's help or interference. 1 year into running my restaurant, I was feeling pretty good about life. The business was steady, my loan payments were manageable, and I was even starting to think about expanding the menu. That's when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Hello, Brittany, it's your mother." I almost hung up right there. After months of blissful silence, hearing her voice felt like a slap in the face. "How did you get this number?" "I got it from your old coworker, Sarah. Listen, honey, we heard from some friends that you have your own restaurant now. That's wonderful. We're so proud of you." The fake sweetness in her voice made my skin crawl. "What do you want, Mom?" "We want to make things right between us. We miss you terribly, and we think maybe we were too harsh before. Family should stick together." I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. "You called me a parasite and threw me out with 3 days' notice. Now you want to make things right? We were just stressed about money, dear. You know how it is. But we've had time to think, and we realize we made a mistake. Let me guess. You found out I'm not living under a bridge somewhere, so now you want back in." The sweet tone disappeared instantly. "Don't be smart with me, young lady. Your sister allowed you to live in her apartment for years. The least you can do is help us out now." "Allowed me?" "I paid rent. Overpaid, actually. Look, Rachel's husband Tom got laid off last month. The new tenants are only paying $1,500, and Rachel is having trouble making ends meet. We thought maybe you could help." There it was, the real reason for the call. "That sounds like a them problem, Mom. How can you be so selfish? We're family." "You made it clear, I'm not family when you need support. I'm only family when you need money." I hung up and immediately blocked that number too. But it didn't end there. The next day, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Rachel, calling me greedy, vindictive, and selfish for refusing to help. She went on about how I was abandoning family and how I'd always been jealous of her success. I didn't bother responding. I just blocked that number and went back to work. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, I was in the middle of lunch rush when I saw them walk through the front door. My parents, Rachel, Tom, and little Emma. They looked around like they owned the place, then sat down at one of my best tables. My server, Jenny, came up to me looking confused. That table says they want to speak to the owner. They're acting really weird. I walked over to their table, my heart pounding. What do you want? We want to order food, Rachel said loudly, making sure other customers could hear. But we don't have any money. Since you're family, we figured you'd feed us for free. Other diners were starting to stare. I could feel my face getting hot with embarrassment and anger. This is a business, not a charity. If you can't pay, you need to leave. We're family, my mother said, just as loudly. Surely you can spare a meal for your own family. Tom leaned back in his chair with that same smug expression I remembered. We'll just come here every day until you start helping us out. Make it a regular thing. That's when I'd had enough. I walked to the front counter and picked up the phone. Security? It's Brittany at Hometown Kitchen. I need you to come remove some people who are trying to get free food and disrupting my business. Within 5 minutes, 2 security guards from the shopping center walked in. I pointed to my family's table. These people are refusing to pay for food and disrupting my customers. I want them removed and banned from the premises. The guards approached the table. Folks, you need to come with us. This is outrageous, my father sputtered. She's our daughter. Sir, this is private property. If the owner wants you to leave, you have to leave. Rachel started to make a scene, raising her voice about how ungrateful I was, but the guards weren't having it. They escorted my entire family out, while other customers watched in stunned silence. I made sure to tell the guards to get a good look at all of them and never let them back in. After they left, I had to apologize to my other customers for the disruption. Most of them were understanding, and a few even left bigger tips than usual. That was 2 years ago now. I haven't seen or heard from any of them since, although they still occasionally send messages from new phone numbers. Always the same thing, how much they miss me, how we should reconcile, how family is the most important thing. I delete them without reading past the first line. My business, on the other hand, has absolutely flourished. Last month, I got the opportunity I'd been waiting for. The restaurant chain where I used to work went bankrupt. Turns out Madison's brilliant management and innovative ideas weren't so brilliant after all. Her father lost everything. I bought the place for a fraction of what it was worth just 2 years ago. The building, the equipment, even the name, though I changed that immediately. I kept the employees I knew and trusted, the ones who'd been there during my time and had survived Madison's reign of terror. It felt incredible walking into that building as the owner, instead of the deputy director who got thrown out for being too old. Some of the staff who remembered me couldn't believe it. A few even teared up when I told them their jobs were safe. I'm making more money now than I ever dreamed possible when I was working for someone else. I'm finally ready to buy my own place instead of renting. No more landlords, no more depending on anyone else for a roof over my head. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my family had been supportive when I lost my job. If they'd shown even a little bit of understanding or encouragement instead of immediately writing me off as a burden. But honestly, I'm glad things happened the way they did. Getting thrown out forced me to finally pursue my own dreams instead of making other people's dreams come true. Being called a parasite made me realize I'd been the one supporting parasites for years. My family thought they were punishing me by cutting me off. Instead, they set me free, and I've never been happier.